The arrangement. The cathedral's stained glass cast jeweled light across Nathaniel Morgan's perfectly tailored tuxedo as he stood at the altar, his expression an impressive mask of calm. At 34, the tech prodigy had transformed his startup into Nexus Innovations, a billion-dollar empire revolutionizing artificial intelligence. Today should have been the crowning achievement in his meticulously planned life. The string quartet's melody floated through the vaulted ceilings as 400 guests, industry titans, politicians, and celebrities, watched the ceremony unfold. Vivian Blackwood, daughter of Senator James Blackwood and Nathaniel's bride-to-be, would arrive any minute, completing the perfect merger of technology and political influence that the Morgan family had orchestrated. "You look like you might throw up," whispered Julian. His best man and college roommate Nathaniel adjusted his platinum cufflinks. "Just focus on not dropping the rings." His eyes drifted across the sea of faces until they found her, Delilah Winters, seated discreetly in the middle rows, wearing a simple blue dress that matched the color of the algorithms they'd coded together during their company's infancy. She hadn't wanted to come, but he'd insisted. "You're still my chief research officer," he had told her. "It would look strange if you weren't there." The truth was more complicated. For 5 years, Delilah had been his intellectual equal, the brilliant physicist who transformed his theoretical frameworks into working models. Together, they'd pulled all-nighters fueled by cheap takeout and expensive dreams. She challenged his ideas, refined his vision, and somehow understood the language of his mind better than anyone. What had started as professional respect evolved into something neither of them acknowledged. Instead, they buried themselves in code and conferences, prototype failures, and breakthrough successes. Their company grew, investors multiplied, and suddenly the scrappy startup became a corporate juggernaut. That quote when his family intervened. The Morgans had endured 3 generations of building wealth and influence. They weren't about to let their heir marry some lab partner with no connections, as his mother had put it. The introduction to Vivian had been carefully engineered. Charity galas, casual dinner parties, orchestrated run-ins. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and strategic about her ambitions. The relationship progressed with the efficiency of a business acquisition. 8 months ago, when the engagement was announced, Delilah had simply nodded and presented him with a new algorithm the next day. 2 weeks later, she requested a transfer to their Tokyo research division. He denied it, selfishly perhaps, unable to imagine building the company's future without her insights. She stayed, but something fundamental had shifted. The cathedral doors opened. The music swelled. Guests rose to their feet as Vivian appeared in a cascade of designer silk and family diamonds. Objectively stunning, she moved with practiced grace down the aisle, her smile calculated for maximum impact. Nathaniel S. gaze drifted again to Delilah, who was staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, the quiet resignation in her eyes made his chest constrict. In that moment, the cathedral seemed to shrink around him, the air becoming thin and insufficient. This was what success looked like, he reminded himself. This strategic alliance would open political doors, secure government contracts, expand Nexus Innovations globally. Sacrifices were necessary for legacy-building. The priest began speaking, words about love and devotion echoing hollowly against stone walls. Vivian took her place beside him, her perfume expensively subtle. And as Nathaniel turned to face his bride, something inside him, something that had been quietly screaming for months, finally broke through the surface of his carefully constructed reality. Silent devotion. 3 years earlier, the Nexus Innovations headquarters had been nothing more than a converted warehouse with ambitious ideas scrawled across whiteboard walls. Nathaniel remembered the night he'd first realized his feelings for Delilah transcended professional admiration. They, quote, "had been working on a neural network that kept failing, their frustration mounting with each unsuccessful iteration. At 2 a.m., Delilah had suddenly stood up, stretching her arms above her head. "We're thinking about this all wrong," she'd said, tugging her curly hair into a messy bun. "We're trying to teach the system to think like us when we should be teaching it to think beyond us." She'd grabbed a marker, crossed out their previous architecture, and began drawing something entirely new. Nathaniel had watched her hands move confidently across the board, her eyes bright with inspiration despite the late hour. The elegant solution she proposed was so brilliant in its simplicity that he'd felt a surge of something beyond professional respect. "This is why I need you," he'd said without thinking. "Your mind works in dimensions mine can't reach." She'd turned to him then, marker still in hand, a smudge of blue on her cheek. "We complement each other," she'd replied. "That's what makes us work." The memory dissolved as the organist played another chord, bringing Nathaniel back to the cathedral. Vivian was reciting her vows with practiced precision. He should be listening, but his mind kept drifting to those countless nights with Delilah. They, quote, "built everything together. The algorithms that predicted consumer behavior with uncanny accuracy, the voice recognition system that understood emotional subtleties, the partnership that became the foundation of a technological revolution. Their collaboration had been seamless, their communication often wordless. They could exchange a glance across a conference room and know exactly what the other was thinking. The day his family had introduced him to Vivian at the charity gala, he'd brought Delilah as his +1. Not as a date. They'd never crossed that line, but because he'd wanted her perspective on a potential investor. Watching her navigate the room in her modest dress among the designer gowns, confidently discussing quantum computing with Nobel laureates, he'd felt an inexplicable pride. Later that evening, his mother had cornered him near the bar. "The Blackwood girl is perfect for you," she'd insisted. "Her father's committee oversees tech regulation. Think strategically, Nathaniel." He'd laughed it off, but the seed had been planted. Weekly family dinners became strategy sessions about his personal brand. The Morgan legacy, his father reminded him constantly, wasn't just about building companies, but building dynasties. When he'd finally agreed to dinner with Vivian, he'd told himself it was just business networking. She was undeniably intelligent, with degrees from Wharton and connections throughout Washington. Their conversations were stimulating, if somewhat calculated. She understood ambition and image in ways Delilah never cared about. The engagement had happened faster than he'd anticipated, momentum carrying him forward like a current. The morning he'd told Delilah, she'd been reviewing test results at her desk. "I'm happy for you," she'd said without looking up, her voice perfectly steady. "She seems like the appropriate choice." That word, appropriate, had lingered between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. The following weeks had been tense, their effortless communication suddenly strained. When she'd requested the transfer to Tokyo, he'd panicked. Nexus needed her brilliance, he'd argued. The reality that he needed her presence remained unspoken. Now, standing at the altar, Nathaniel realized how much had gone unsaid between them, how they'd built an empire together, but never acknowledged the foundation of feelings beneath their professional partnership, how he'd chosen practical alliances over the quiet devotion that had sustained him through every challenge. As Vivian finished her vows, all eyes turned to Nathaniel. It was his turn to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The confession, Nathaniel. The priest's gentle prompt cut through his thoughts. The cathedral fell silent as Nathaniel stood frozen at the altar. Vivian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, her eyes communicating a clear message. "Don't mess this up." He cleared his throat. "Before I say my vows," he began, his voice echoing in the hushed space, "I need to be honest." A murmur rippled through the gathering. In the front row, his mother's posture stiffened while his father leaned forward. With narrowed eyes, "I've built my career on innovation," Nathaniel continued, his voice growing steadier, "on taking risks when others played it safe, on being honest about what works and what doesn't." He turned slightly, his gaze finding Delilah in the crowd. Her eyes widened with confusion. "Vivian," he said, turning back to his bride, "you're extraordinary, intelligent, accomplished, perfect on paper. But standing here, I realize I'm about to make a commitment based on strategic advantages rather than truth." Senator Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while his wife clutched her pearls. Camera phones rose throughout the cathedral as guests sensed a moment worth capturing. "The truth," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in, "is that I've been in love with someone else for years. Someone who saw value in my ideas when they were just scribbles on napkins. Someone who has challenged me, inspired me, and fundamentally changed how I see the world." Vivian's perfect composure cracked, her cheeks flushing with anger and humiliation. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Julian stepped forward, placing a concerned hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, but Nathaniel gently shrugged it off. There was no turning back now. "Delilah Winters," he said, his voice carrying her name to the cathedral rafters, "has been my partner in building everything meaningful in my life. And I've been too much of a coward to admit that she's not just my business partner, but the person I want to share my life with." The cathedral erupted in shocked exclamations. Photographers who had been hired to capture the society wedding of the year were now documenting its spectacular implosion. Vivian took 2 steps backward, her expression transforming from embarrassment to cold fury. "You absolute bastard," she said, her voice low but carrying. "You couldn't have figured this out before I was standing in a $100,000 dress in front of the governor." Nathaniel's mother had risen to her feet, horror etched on her face, while his father sat stone still, his expression unreadable. In the middle of the chaos, Nathaniel's eyes remained fixed on Delilah. She sat perfectly still, her face a complicated mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, something that gave him hope despite the disaster unfolding around them. "I'm sorry, Vivian," he said sincerely. "You deserve someone who loves you completely, not someone marrying you for corporate advantages." The Blackwood family was already moving, the senator's security detail forming a protective barrier around Vivian as they escorted her back down the aisle. Guests were standing, some moving toward exits, others remaining to witness the scandal's conclusion. Nathaniel stepped down from the altar, moving deliberately through the chaos toward Delilah's row. Whispers followed him. "Lost his mind. Stock will plummet. Career suicide." He stopped in front of her seat. Delilah looked up at him, her expression guarded, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years of working side by side, and you choose now to say this? "I know," he acknowledged. "My timing is terrible." A small, reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Your timing has always been terrible. Remember the Tokyo presentation when your slides crashed?" "You saved me then," he said, extending his hand. "I'm hoping you might save me again." The cathedral had grown quieter, hundreds of eyes watching this unexpected scene unfold, phones recording. Every word. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice barely audible, "do you have any idea what you've just done? Aftermath and choices. You've destroyed your family relationships, potentially tanked your company's stock, and humiliated one of the most politically connected families in the country," Delilah summarized, pacing the small antechamber where they'd retreated while chaos continued in the main cathedral. "All because you had an epiphany at the worst possible moment." Nathaniel sat on a bench, his tie loosened, looking simultaneously wrecked and relieved. "When you put it that way, it sounds rather impulsive." Impulsive doesn't begin to cover it. She stopped pacing and faced him. And your solution was to drag me into this spectacle? I've spent years being taken seriously as your company's research director. Now everyone will say I slept my way to the top. Outside, they could hear security attempting to manage the press that had materialized with remarkable speed. Julian stood guard at the door, occasionally providing updates on the deteriorating situation. Your father is threatening to call an emergency board meeting, Julian reported. Vivian's family has already released a statement condemning your unconscionable behavior, and your mother may never speak to you again. Nathaniel nodded, absorbing the consequences. What about stock movement? Markets are closed for the weekend, but analysts are predicting Monday will be rough. When they were alone again, Delilah studied Nathaniel's face. Why now? After all this time, why at your wedding? He met her eyes directly. Because standing there, about to commit my life to a relationship built on strategic advantages, I suddenly couldn't breathe. Everything we've created together, the company, the technology, our partnership, it's all been real. My relationship with Vivian never was. His phone buzzed incessantly with incoming messages. He silenced it without looking. You never gave us a chance, Delilah said quietly. You never even asked if I felt the same way. I know. He stood and took a step toward her. I made assumptions based on your professional boundaries, and my family made it very clear what kind of partner was acceptable for the Morgan heir. A sharp knock interrupted them. Julian poked his head in. They're bringing cars around back. The press is getting aggressive. Delilah wrapped her arms around herself. I never answered you out there. You don't owe me an answer, Nathaniel said. I dropped this bomb without warning. You have every right to walk away. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing everything at stake. Her professional reputation, the company they'd built, the personal feelings she'd suppressed for years. You know what's ironic, she finally said. I requested that Tokyo transfer because I couldn't bear watching you marry someone else. I was trying to do the right thing, to preserve our professional relationship by putting distance between us. Hope flickered across his face. And now? Now? She shook her head, a mixture of exasperation and affection in her expression. Now we have a public relations nightmare, potentially angry investors, and your ex-fiancé's family gunning for revenge. That doesn't answer my question. Delilah stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her brown eyes. My answer is yes, Nathaniel. Despite your terrible timing and questionable execution, yes. I've been in love with you since you fell asleep on your keyboard coding our first prototype and woke up with key marks on your face. His smile transformed his entire demeanor. Before he could respond, Julian burst in again. We need to move now. The Blackwoods are threatening legal action for public humiliation. Your board members are calling for statements, and at least 3 news vans just pulled up. Nathaniel turned to Delilah, extending his hand. Ready to face the firing squad together. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the door that led to chaos and consequences. Years of careful professional distance weighed against the truth. They'd finally acknowledged. Delilah took his hand. Partners in catastrophe, just like we were partners in success. As they prepared to face the storm, Julian added casually, for what it's worth, the development team started a betting pool 2 years ago about when you two would finally figure it out. Looks like Rajesh from engineering just won a lot of money. Part 5. New Beginnings. New beginnings. 6 months later, Nathaniel stood on the balcony of a small villa overlooking the Mediterranean, the morning sun warming his shoulders as he sipped coffee. The previous half-year had been the most challenging and rewarding of his life. The financial consequences had been swift and significant. Nexus Innovations stock had plummeted 28% in the immediate aftermath. Major clients, concerned about stability, had threatened to pull contracts. The Blackwood family had filed multiple lawsuits, most focused on intentional infliction of emotional distress and breach of promise. His family's reaction had been equally severe. His father hadn't spoken to him for 3 months. His mother still communicated primarily through her assistant. The family had attempted to leverage their significant shareholdings to remove him as CEO, an effort that had failed by the narrowest of margins. Professionally, both he and Delilah had faced intense scrutiny. Industry blogs speculated about their relationship timeline, suggesting improprieties and favoritism. Former colleagues gave anonymous interviews describing tension and obvious chemistry that had made others uncomfortable. Through it all, they'd remained focused on what mattered, the work they believed in, and the truth between them. "Any regrets?" Delilah asked, joining him on the balcony. Her curly hair was loose around her shoulders, the Mediterranean breeze tousling it gently. "About the wedding disaster?" "Absolutely. About us? Not for a second." She leaned against the railing, beside him. "The new neural network tests look promising. I think we've finally cracked the emotional intelligence component." This was the pattern they'd established. Personal moments seamlessly intertwined with their shared work passion. The boundaries that had once seemed so necessary now felt arbitrary. "The board meeting next week will be crucial," Nathaniel noted. "The third-quarter numbers should help our case." Despite the upheaval, Nexus had managed to release its most innovative product yet, an AI system that could adapt to individual user emotional patterns, creating truly personalized digital experiences. The technology Delilah had conceptualized years ago was finally reaching its potential, and the market was responding enthusiastically. "Julian called," Delilah said. "The Blackwoods have agreed to settlement talks. Apparently, the senator's re-election campaign is making him more amenable to resolving this quietly." Nathaniel nodded. "And my parents? Your mother accepted our dinner invitation. That's progress." He smiled, setting down his coffee cup to take her hand. "Remember that algorithm failure 3 years ago, when you said we were thinking about it all wrong? Vividly, we'd been awake for nearly 40 hours. You said we needed to teach the system to think beyond us, not like us." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's what you did for me. You taught me to see beyond the constraints I'd accepted as inevitable." Delilah leaned into his touch. "We've paid a high price for this. Worth every penny," he replied without hesitation. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Delilah's phone chiming with the distinctive tone reserved for breakthrough alerts from their research team. Some things never changed. Their work would always be integral to their relationship. As she checked the message, a slow smile spread across her face. "The Tokyo team has replicated our results. The emotional recognition accuracy is holding at 94% across all test groups." Nathaniel's eyes lit up with the familiar excitement of scientific validation. "That's well above industry standards. It means we can move forward with the medical applications we discussed. Autism support systems, depression early warning indicators, all the projects the board considered too speculative." They had pivoted some of Nexus's focus toward assistive technologies rather than pure profit centers. Another change that had met with resistance but aligned more closely with their shared vision. "We should celebrate," Nathaniel suggested. Delilah's expression turned thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the original algorithm, the one that failed. We were trying to make it perfect instead of making it adaptable." "Are we still talking about algorithms?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Maybe not entirely." She turned to face him fully. "Perfection is overrated. The Blackwoods, your family's expectations, the appropriate path, that was never going to be sustainable. What we have, messy, complicated, occasionally chaotic, it works because it's real. Nathaniel pulled her closer. The cathedral would have made for better photos, but I prefer this reality, a little villa, breakthrough research, and rebuilding on our own terms. As they stood together overlooking the sea, the challenges ahead remained substantial. Investor confidence to maintain, innovation to pursue, personal and professional boundaries to navigate. But for the first time in their partnership, they were facing it all without pretense or unspoken truths between them. The morning sun caught the simple band on Delilah's left hand. Not a flashy diamond, but a platinum ring etched with the equation that had launched their first successful algorithm. A reminder that the best partnerships, like the best innovations, were built on honesty, compatibility, and the courage to rewrite expectations.